preparation get my legs, my feet to be not swollen. So no one can see my toes because I have classic runner toes. So we're 24 hours out now from the half. It's Saturday morning. I'm gonna go now and do a quick shakeout run, probably just 20 minutes, easy, and then a few straights at race pace, because after resting, so I had a full rest day yesterday and on Thursday, I feel like I can't even run anymore. But that's just a normal feeling you get when you usually train a lot and then you rest too much. Too much rest is bad for the body. And then we're gonna take on the day, pick up the bib as well, and then just, I guess, check out the city, get another high carb day in. So yesterday I did 600 grams, which is probably on the higher end for a half. But because I've typically already consumed 450 and sometimes even over 500 on normal days, I just bumped it up slightly. Took out all the fiber, took out all or most of the fats, and kept the protein lower to not have an absolute shitting disaster on the run.
Kommt an unseren Stand, es zahlt sich richtig aus. Wir haben exklusive Trinkflaschen, wir haben exklusive erstens
und die Tasche finde ich ganz vorne beim ersten Teil. Okay, super. Danke.
Live-Löser. Zeig mal her.
genauso wie Profisportler.
Pre-race carbs and then 5 gels. Wir haben links. Ja. Ne? Da ist ja die Brücke. We're now one day post the half marathon and we got what we came for. I realized I didn't document this much over the weekend of the actual race and everything, but that's just how it is. When you're doing these kind of things, you obviously don't have the physical nor the mental capacity to then also video everything and record. So my initial goal was to get a sub 1:35 in, and I came in at chip time 1:33.17, and my watch time was a 1:33.55. What counts, in my opinion, in a race is the chip time anyway. I also ranked 6th in my age group and 19th out of all the females that participated in the half. And this is around a 6-minute PB compared to my previous half marathon time of 1:40, which I ran last year in November as part of a training session when I was doing the Abu Dhabi marathon prep. So overall, I'm very happy with this result. There are a couple of things that I could have done slightly differently or better during the race, which would have maybe put me officially under a 1:34. But that's always the case. In hindsight, there will always be things that you could have done better or things that you shouldn't have done. But I'm going to be walking you through the most important parts here so you can take away some value as well in terms of what I've done for me to get this result. Considering as well that I had a failed marathon prep last year and I completely fucked up my taper and got ill. After that, I had lost a good chunk of fitness, and also my confidence was a bit knocked because obviously when you're prepping for a race for 16 weeks and you then get sick, you can't do the event, you start feeling a bit low in general. Now, I do think if that hadn't had happened, so if I hadn't gotten sick last year during the marathon taper, I probably could have pushed this half marathon a few minutes closer to a 90-minute time, potentially a 1:33 or maybe even a 1:32. But that's just how these things are. For this half marathon, I ran a 12-week prep block that I split into 2 parts. So the first block was mainly focused on building volume, aerobic base, and also rebuilding my threshold. And then the second part of the block was focused on race pace volume, so running at my target race pace for longer distances. I did 4 runs per week and 3 strength sessions. You could probably get away with doing 3 runs as well, but I wanted to do higher volume, so I started out this prep around 45 kilometers a week, and then I built it up to 62 kilometers in my peak week. For the strength training as well, I was running an upper-lower full body split, with my lower body heavily focused on single leg movements, and then the upper body side of things, and obviously some of the lower body as well, more bodybuilding style training. I lift in the gym like a bodybuilder. I'm heavily focused on progressively overloading and building muscle. I do think as a runner, if you're not lifting, you're leaving gains on the table, and if you do want to build your physique as well, then the lifting is of course a non-negotiable as well. So progressing your running really isn't random. There is a clear process behind it, and this is exactly the runs that I've used in this half marathon prep to take my half marathon time to a sub 95 minute. So I use these 4 runs: race pace, threshold intervals, tempo run, and easy run. The race pace run, I did 8 up to 15 kilometers at race pace continuously. So this is a hard, continuous effort. For my threshold intervals, I did 1 to 3 kilometer repeats between my 5k to 10k pace. So for me, this was between a 4:10 to a 4:20 pace. These are the ones you're gonna be redlining. So these are brutally hard efforts that you need to be physically and mentally ready for to really hit hard. And you're probably gonna feel a bit of anxiety when you're doing this. And then for my easy or moderate runs, I did 1 tempo run. So 16k around marathon pace. So for me, this was between a 4:40 to a 5:10 pace, where I kept my heart rate between a 1:45 to a 1:55. And then the last one was my true easy run. I actually only did 1 easy run a week at 10 to 12k, where I kept my heart rate around the 120 to max the 130 HR. So for me, I ran these nothing faster than 5:30, sometimes even 5:45, sometimes even close to a 6-minute pace. If your easy runs has your heart rate on a 150, you're kidding yourself. You're not running at an easy effort. A 150 heart rate is a zone-free tempo effort. So the best thing to do here is to really drop your ego and keep your easy runs actually easy, even if you need to be running slower than a 6-minute pace. Because this means you're actually going to build the aerobic base that you do need to hit these fucking hard runs that are going to push your threshold up and that will make you a faster runner. Then what should you do if you can't run a longer distance at your race pace yet, let's say when you do start your half marathon prep? This was actually the case for me when I started this prep back in February. So what I did is I started my threshold intervals at my race pace. So I only started doing, let's say, 4 times 2 kilometers at race pace with a rest period in between. And that's how I pushed up my threshold, and I was then able to run 8 kilometers continuous for my very first race pace run in the second training block. Then I simply built it up from there every week, increasing the volume up to 15 kilometers. If you can do a half marathon prep and you can run 12k or 15k at your race pace, there is a high chance that you can then run the full half marathon at your target race pace. Then physique-wise, so this is another very important point, because everyone online is now shouting about fueling this, fueling that, carb intake here, carb intake there. And yes, these things are important, but they're only going to be effective once you have the foundations in place. So for me, I always prioritize my physique and my lifting regardless of what I'm doing otherwise. Because I see a lot of people nowadays saying things like, oh, just focus on what your body can do, and I put my physique to the side, I just focus on performance. These two things go hand in hand. They're not separate things. Like, you can't optimize or maximize your performance, your endurance, your running without having the physique in place. And at the same time, you're probably not going to have the best physique if you don't focus on your training performance and your training progress. So I kept lifting throughout this entire prep 3 days a week. In the final couple of weeks of the prep, especially around week 11, week 12, maybe already week 10, I started pulling back the intensity of my lifting slightly. There were maybe 1 or 2 weeks where I only did 2 lifting sessions because I had to take an extra rest day because I felt fucking wrecked and my recovery was shit, my cycle was missing. So I had to pull back with an additional rest day. But other than that, my lifting progression stayed consistent. I think the body composition is such an important factor when it comes to actually making the fueling effective, because if someone doesn't carry enough muscle tissue, their fueling and their additional carb intake is never going to have the same impact as it would have if their body composition was in a good spot, if they did carry a lot of muscle mass, if they did have great strength levels. Then the pacing strategy on race day in a half marathon is going to determine whether you manage to hit the PB or not. So there's typically 3 ways you can do this. So an even split is where you run pretty much the same pace throughout the entire duration. A negative split where you start slower, you finish faster. Positive split where you start faster and you finish slower. I don't think anyone will run a positive split on purpose. It usually happens when people are a bit silly and they go out way too fast and finish way slower. So a negative split is typically what people want to be hitting in a race. However, for me personally, I had to stop being a bit of a softie and tell myself that I needed to start slower so that I don't blow up too early in the race. So I went out for this half marathon pretty close to race pace and just held on to the pace and suffered for pretty much 90 minutes. And again, this is where durability, physically, your fueling, and the way you've prepped for the race will come in. Because if you do this right, you're going to be able to hold on to a hard effort for a longer duration, and you're not going to end up dropping the pace towards the end of a race and completely blow up. And then last but not least, the race day fueling. So I'm a heavier runner. I ran this race at around 75 kg in a 4:27 pace, which is fucking heavy for a female runner. But I will likely never weigh 50 kg, probably even 60 kg. So if you're similar, you will likely need more gels than the average runner. So I took 5 gels on board during this half marathon. Quite honestly, I could have actually done with a 6th one because I was suffering like no tomorrow in the final 2 to 3 kilometers. But 5 gels is typically considered quite a lot for a half marathon. But again, it comes down to you, what you've done in the prep and what your body actually needs to get through. There's also a couple of other factors that will play a role, of course, body weight, your physiology, the climate, the course. And this is something that I've practiced throughout the prep. So don't underestimate, all other factors being in place, how much fuel you actually need during a hard 90-minute effort, because it's likely going to be more than what you think. And that will have a massive impact on whether you can actually hold on to the effort throughout the duration and the pace. Or if you're going to hit the wall like no tomorrow and crumble under the pain that you're going to go through when you're doing a race. So these are the 6 things, or the 6 pillars, or whatever you want to call it, that really pushed my running, my performance, and my paces upwards. An important thing is these all go hand in hand, like they play together. You can't just work on one individual thing and expect the rest to fall into place. So number 1, having a strategy in place for the prep block and the training in general over, I'd say at the very minimum, a 6 to 12 months period. So what you're going to do pre-prep, during the prep, post-prep. What does the training block look like? How much time do you actually need to prep for the individual race? I think important here as well is there is such a thing as pre-prep. I typically don't like being in a full-blown prep for more than 16 weeks because it does get quite taxing and anal. When you do these things properly and you really see pushing your limits and chasing your athletic development as a lifestyle, you're always somehow going to be in prep. Like you're always training for something, whether you're in the months before a prep, you're in the middle of a prep, you're in the period after a prep. For me, for example, right now, I finished this half marathon prep. I hit my half marathon goal. I now have a couple of weeks where I'm going to increase my strength training, improve my aerobic base even further for the next 6 weeks or so. And then I'm going to be going into the next marathon prep. So knowing the overall strategy and mapping this out is such a game changer. Like knowing how to get you from A to B, like what the gap is. As a coach, for me, this is the most important thing. And then being prepared for the race day, so knowing exactly the best pacing strategy for you to hit your PB and the fueling strategy as well. I think bottom line, the most important thing is throughout the prep is training hard, of course, but at the same time training smart. And then also feeling confident at the start line, like racing with confidence. I do think that makes such a big difference. If you can stand at the starting line, knowing that you've prepped properly, you've given it 100%, and you also prepped right, and you know exactly how to approach certain situations, also how to sit in pain, how to be physically and mentally ready to suffer to some degree. That's just going to make, or at least for me, that's made throughout the years a massive difference. And it also comes from racing experience.